Before I ask you about Ramsay and Mary, I have to ask you about, you were in Rome for the Pope's funeral.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was an extraordinary experience. I'm so glad I was there because I thought it was important that Scotland was represented at the Pope's funeral, a man for whom I think there was very broad respect and admiration. But it was an amazing experience to witness the ceremony and to be there and to just to see the affection that there was for Pope Francis. I think one of the most significant moments for me was, you're in St. Peter's Square, there's hundreds of thousands of people there, there's totally noisy hubbub. And the minute the Pope's coffin was carried out of St. Peter's Basilica into the square, the police went completely silent. And it then moved into this totally quiet, respectful environment until essentially his coffin was going away and people were applauding loudly and warmly. And so it was an incredible experience, a great privilege to be there. And I was quite struck by once we made it clear that I was going, the number of people that got in touch with me who said they wanted me to take their respect and sympathy and admiration with me on their behalf to Rome. So I felt very privileged to be able to do that for people.
This is like just where the nosy wee guy in me comes out, but what was the security like there? Because you've got every world leader and religious leaders and stuff.
Intense. So there's a huge cordon around the St. Peter's Square. So to get into the area where all of the public figures, world leaders were seated, it was ticket only. It was very intense security to get in there, and of course like everyone was there, everyone, and it's quite interesting when when President Zelensky came out of the St. Peter's Basilica, he received warm applause from the whole crowd. Obviously, the picture was being beamed on the screens. So I thought that was quite interesting, that Zelensky was the one that really captured the public support and endorsement.
So interesting. When I saw you were there, I thought, wow, what I would give. I'll need to show you this later. I've got a selfie with Pope Francis.
Oh, have you?
In St. Peter's Square. And he's in the Pope Mobile. And I'm like, so I was there. The way it turned out, right? Should have put two and two together, but I'm like, Sunday afternoon, walking, this was in 2015, thought walk down to the Vatican again. And I was like, why are all these people here?
Wow.
Probably something to do with the Pope's coming to do Mass or whatever, and they came in and driving down. So I've just like taken the photo. I swear, you'll see it, he's looking like down the barrel of the camera, it's nuts. And then they stopped and picked a baby out of the crowd, just like from right beside me. It was incredible.
But I think those moments were characteristic of what he was like.
Yeah.
There was such a personal warmth towards people, a love for people. And of course, I think that was part of what I certainly felt on Saturday. People were reciprocating the love for Pope Francis that he had for them. And we're at a moment in the world just now where there doesn't feel like there's an awful lot of love around. And Pope Francis represented that kind of warmth of love towards people.
I'll tell you, there is a lot of love, and this might strike a chord with you as a runner. Have you seen any of the clips and highlights of the London Marathon? I've been crying my eyes out watching them.
It's interesting that the one and only marathon that I've run was in Rome. I did it just before my 50th birthday in 2014. So I set myself, I never thought I would ever run a marathon. And I'd built up the training. I did a couple of half marathons in quick succession, one in Edinburgh, one in Glasgow. And I thought, well, look, this is the moment where if you're ever going to run a marathon, keep the training up and do it. And I was just about to turn 50. So we went to Rome for the marathon. And it was so funny, on the Saturday, the day before the marathon, I'm walking around with my family, and it was a really kind of balmy spring day, and I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute, this is not going to work for me. It's too hot, it's too warm. And I got up on the Sunday morning to do the marathon, and it was like Scotland in November. drizzling rain,
result.
cloud everywhere, really kind of damp atmosphere. I thought, this is perfect for me. She had all these fabulous Italian runners who were shivering, and I'm thinking, this is perfect conditions for me.
Tropical.
But the funny thing about where you're saying there, where you stumbled across Goodwill in St. Peter's Square, the route started off at the Colosseum and it went all around the old city, it went out in the suburbs. Then halfway through it, it goes right through the centre of Rome and past the Vatican. And it was, by the time I got there, it was about 11. You know, the fast folk would have got there an awful lot earlier, but it took me 2 hours to get there. And I ran past St. Peter's Square about 11 o'clock, and of course all the pilgrims are waiting to hear the Pope, so it's a huge crowd. And I had this, I was wearing this saltire vest top, and of course all these Italians, they're all shouting, Scots here, Scots here. It was really encouraging, and
love it.
so it was a fabulous experience to do it, and to do it in Rome.
I know.
And of course you're running around thinking, oh, how am I going to keep going? And then you think, oh, wait a minute, there's another fabulous building I'll see as I run a bit further along. And then you think, oh, well, that's got me this far. And then you see another fabulous building, and and then you'd be going past cafes where folk were sitting, and they'd be standing up and cheering and applauding and all.
I love it. I love it. Watching the sort of TikTok videos and stuff, I was just struck by just a nice wee reminder.
Yeah.
I think there is goodwill and love and kindness. It's, oh God, it's such a trope in it, that even that word, sometimes when I say it, I'm like, oh, it's losing its meaning, but it was great. So if anybody wants to feel good, go and search London Marathon on TikTok and you feel great. Sorry, I had to ask you that, just it totally sprung to mind. So your middle name is Ramsay after your grandfather.
Yes.
There's a slightly interesting sort of funny juxtaposition. The First Minister of Scotland, somebody who was sort of prominent in the independence campaign, grandparents moved up from England.
Well, they were both born in Scotland.
Right.
But they were located. My grandfather was in the army, so they were in army accommodation down in Aldershot, and then they came back to Edinburgh in the late 1920s, because my mum was born in 1931, and she was born in Edinburgh by that time.
Oh.
So so they moved around as part of being in the army, but eventually settled in Edinburgh.
Where are we right now? So that's the City Chambers in Glasgow, just behind us. So you've got the old GPO, General Post Office, and I lived in a flat there in 2010. And last year I had my family tree done by a professional genealogist, and found out that my great-great-grandfather had come up, he was born in Greenwich.
Uh-huh.
He came up and he worked in the GPO like during the sort of war effort.
Oh, right.
And it's just that mad wee crossover where, like,
I know.
it's incredible, isn't it?
And you see these connections that emerge as you delve into your history. So that's my mother's family, and my father's family. My granny came from Orkney, and my granddad came from Edinburgh. And my granny, she lived with us at home. Her husband died in the 1940s. She was widowed very young, and she lived with us at home until she died. And I've got a very special place in my heart for Orkney, because she would talk to me. She would always talk about home, and home was not where she lived.
Yeah.
Home was Orkney. So there was that deep sense of connection came from that, and I always enjoyed talking to her about that. And then, of course, when I've gone back to Orkney later in life, you can, I took a photograph of her son standing on the pier in Stromness where my granny was born, and from the stories she told me of places she went to from that pier, I thought, well, my granny must have walked in these steps. What would it be, 100 years ago?
That's mad, isn't it?
And so it does give you, I think that helps to ground us all. When you've got connections like that, you think, well, actually, I'm really part of something.
Absolutely. So when I found out where my great-great-grandfather was born as well, it was in Greenwich, and I looked it up in Google Maps, and I was like, he's born in this house that I walk past all the time. So his feet have like walked in these same steps, and so he then during the war effort he gets sent to Leith, then he gets sent to Dunoon, where he met what became his wife. And I always think like, I know there are loads of moving parts in that type of thing, but this one guy being born in this one house that I walked past, and then he's going to live this mad life, and then it's resulted in me like being here.
That's right.
There's something about the residual energy as well. Well, we're on World War, the Great Wars. Can you tell us about when you found the medals in your grand's house?
Well, it was I'll never forget this, and obviously it's something that's been a big part of my family life. But I was about 7, so this would be about 1971, 1972, and my granny lived in a ground floor flat in Stenhouse in Edinburgh, and I was there just stoating about, and I was rummaging about in a drawer in her wardrobe. It was a big drawer underneath the wardrobe, and I came across this frame which had 4 medals in it, and they were, on a cushion. It was very pristine, and it was covered by a towel. And I wandered through to her to see, what's this? And she sat me down, and she explained that these were the medals that her son, my mum's brother, my late uncle, had been awarded for his service in the Second World War. And one of the medals was the Victoria Cross.
It's like the highest honour you can receive, isn't it?
It's the highest award for gallantry you can receive in the British Armed Forces. My uncle he's called Thomas Hunter. He was a corporal in the Royal Marines, and he had led a troop as part of the invasion to reclaim Italy and to get the fascists out. So they were going across land, and suddenly they came under attack, and there were German forces there. So my uncle was in command of the troop, and he basically took a Bren gun and went out onto the open land to try to defend his troop. And he commanded all the fire that was coming their way. There were, the German troops were firing at him exclusively, which gave the rest of his troop time to get cover. And he continued to go ahead. He got into a building, and he suppressed some of the Germans, and the fighting went on, and then he was killed with a bullet instantaneously. Now, what then essentially was judged was that he had laid down his life to protect the others, and he'd been awarded the Victoria Cross. So my granny explained all this to me. This was news to me, obviously. I was very young. And I remember looking up at her, and I saw her face. She looked like a woman who'd just been told that minute that her son had been killed. So that grief never left her face. It was emblazoned on her face. And when I think about that over the subsequent years before she died, I could still see that grief there. So it's been an incredible connection.
Yeah.
And my granny took a decision in the mid-1970s before she died to bequeath the Victoria Cross to the Royal Marines. So they have that. But I saw the actual medal just a few weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
It was the 80th anniversary of my uncle's death.
April the 3rd.
April the 3rd. And it was just a week before that, the Royal Marines had an event to commemorate his life. And for the first time ever, since that moment, or since the medal was given to the Royal Marines, I saw the real medal, because the one that's on display is a replica. And this was the real medal, which had been brought up under intense security to that event.
The crazy thing for me about looking back at World War II, and you saying your granny, like, the grief still being etched in her face, like, feeling so fresh. So I would have learned about World War II in like the 1990s, but I'm watching it in black and white, and it seems so abstract and so far removed. But so the time period would have been, what, 50 years previous, but if I go back 50 years now, it's only the 1970s.
Correct.
I was playing music for the 70s in my car on the way here.
Of course.
So it's not that long ago.
And also, when you think back to that moment where I discovered the medal and my granny explained it all to me, that was about 25 years after the end of the war. So it actually wasn't an awful long time that had elapsed, which is, 25 years ago was the millennium. Scottish Parliament was established 26 years ago.
Aye.
So it's not exactly.
It's not that far.
But I think that the point that I never forgot was the fact that my granny, I could see on her face the agony of losing her son.
One of the things I was really struck by was your mum's recollection at the age of 14 being called in for work, and she said going in it just felt as if it was utter chaotic grief. And I think there's this thing where you go, oh, it's war, people die, and I don't mean in a dismissive way, but you look at the numbers, whether it's the Holocaust numbers or whether it's the number of men that died that went from Scotland or from Britain, and it doesn't seem very real, and it only seems real when you sort of focus in on the very individual grief and you think, oh, I've been there, I know what that feels like.
Well, I think there's two things I think that I'd say that matter on that. The first is that, so my uncle was killed on the 3rd of April 1945, and the war in Europe ended on the 8th of May 1945. So imagine this. So this is a wee square in Stenhouse Avenue West in Edinburgh. There's a block of 8 tenement flats on that side, 16 tenement flats here, 8 on that side. A few weeks, about a month after my uncle is killed, that square is filled with people in jubilation at the end of the war. Meanwhile,
horrible,
in number 19 Stenhouse Avenue West, my granny is absolutely consumed by grief. Now, there was never any resentment about that because she was as relieved as anybody, but it does illustrate suffering.
Yeah.
The other thing, which I think matters, is that years after this, the early 1980s, my mum stayed at home and brought us up and looked after us. And then when I was about 16, she started taking steps to get back out to work and to do other things when she had some time on her hands. And she went to this adult education course at Edinburgh University. It was 1 day a week, and it was designed for I think it was designed for women who at that era had been at home with their children and they were trying to get back into the world. And she had to write a poem as part of this. It was a literary sitting. She was always interested in reading, and she wrote this poem called "Why a Dish Towel." And so this is in about 1980. So this is 35 years after the end of the war, 35 years after the death of her brother. And the poem was essentially about her horror when she came back from her work that day, and my granny was weeping into a dish towel. Now, why a dish towel? Well, a dish towel because my granny at that time would have gone around with an overall on all day with a dish towel in her pocket for cleaning up things, and the dish towel was what was in her hand when she got the telegram to say her son had been killed. So the point I'm making is that 35 years on, when my mum has to write a poem for an adult education course, she writes a poem about why a dish towel. So I think for me that's a really significant sort of admission that grief never really leaves you, I think.
My pal was killed. I was talking about this just the other day for a sort of work thing, and it doesn't. My pal was murdered when we were 17, so this was 2008, and I thought over periods of time, and it helps me to understand stuff like your granny. I thought over periods of time passes, life moves on, you still feel sad. But over the last year, I think it's because it's kind of like 50% of our lives has happened since, and he's not been here, and just feeling just a proper sadness, and yeah, the waves of total, sometimes just despair, really hit you, and so that's why I was really struck by your mum's sort of recollection of that, and again, her being a wee bit like, what's going on?
I know.
And just
But you think, so she was 14. She's out working because they needed money.
That's mental in itself.
So 14, my son's 14, he's still at school. And, but my mum was out working for a living and gets summoned home from her work to be told this news. But I think the fact that all those years later, the thing she writes about is that moment. I think, and she could have written about countless other moments. She could have written about, her wedding day. She could have written about places that she and my dad visited. She could have written about her two sons. She could have written about anything. But isn't it interesting that that's what she wrote about?
She's probably like totally disassociated in the moment.
But I think it might, in a sense.
And that's why that's focused. But I get what you mean by that's the thing she's focused. But it's so funny that that's the minutiae of what you've zoned in on. But
the dish towel, could she not have had an elegant handkerchief to weep into? Because all the neighbours were in, giving support and solace to my granny.
Well, I've got.
But it's a dish towel.
See, when you run, do you ever listen to podcasts? Do you listen to music, or do you listen to nothing?
I listen to music. Yeah.
At some point, there's a podcast interview of mine I need you to listen.
All right, I'll do that. I'll do it.
It's way 90. He'd been 95 now. A guy, Tom McGoran, and he kind of shot to prominence because he taught himself how to paint when he retired from the railways, and he was painting scenes of what he remembers from like Duke Street and Denniston and Bridgeton and stuff. And he told me about his brothers who went to fight in World War II, and they fought. Is it Monte Cassino? And his telling of that, and he was saying like these battles are sort of glamorized and they're retelling through like film and TV and stuff, and like the bravery and how valiant these men were. And he's like, my brother lost his leg, like another one lost an arm, one died, and to speak to somebody who's nearly 100 to get his recollection, and by the way, razor sharp, and like his memories and stuff.
Well, I had an experience just a few weeks after I became First Minister, and it's one of these experiences which I think is a reminder to me that although there are plenty of tough days in being First Minister, there are other days that are an astonishing privilege to be the First Minister. And this day was when I went to Normandy for the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. And it was a day like this that we're meeting on beautiful blue sky, great weather, and it's out on the memorial is out on a promontory in Normandy, and you can see right down to the shore of the English Channel and the beaches that the troops came onto. And I met a 97-year-old man from Preston Pans Port Seaton, Seaton in East Lothian. And he, at the age of 17, had gone across the English Channel in a boat to go on to the land. Now, there were two really interesting things about that. The first was that he was a fisherman. So he'd been out in a fishing boat from Port Seaton from the age of 15. And he said, when he started off fishing, it was awful. Like he was just sick as a dog all the time. He just couldn't cope with it. And then one day, he stopped being sick. And he thought, oh, I've now acquired my sea legs. So for him, that was a great advantage because he was able to go over the English Channel on an absolutely shocking day of weather when everyone else was absolutely toiling, and he was okay. But then the second thing, he had to get off a boat onto a beach with his stuff to basically start to conquer that landmass. And you literally can't get your head around that. And when you think of it, like when I went to that event, we drove for about, 3.5 hours from Paris to get there. Yeah. So it's a big place. It's a huge landmass. And these guys had to go on and start doing them. So it makes you full of admiration for what they've done.
Oh, incredible. There was a really interesting BBC 4 documentary I watched actually called Hitler, The Lost Tapes. And it was, they found very recently these video footage that soldiers had captured, like sort of amateur hobby cameramen. And you see the, like the sort of D-Day landings from their perspective. It was like haunting, horrendous. To go from that horrifying note, we'll go to happier sort of times. I kind of want to get a sense of you growing up. Do you have siblings?
I've got a brother.
You have a brother? Let's just say we'll start 1970s, Blair Athol Caravan Park. Talk to me about that. I mean, what is that sort of, what did the world seem like, and does this precede the Commonwealth Games, and you know what I'm going to then? Come on.
Well, you're going to, yeah. Well, Blair Athol Caravan Park, one of the ironies of life. I was born and brought up in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And the way that my parents judged we could get a holiday.
This is Perthshire, by the way, isn't it? Yeah.
Perthshire. So I was born and brought up in Edinburgh, and the way my parents judged that we could get a holiday was if we bought a tent. So
as in like a
camping tent.
Right, okay.
Poles, everything, the whole thing. It was a nightmare putting that up, an absolute nightmare. I hated putting that tent up, but it was, and the poles were always breaking and all the rest of it. It was quite a nightmare. But it meant we got a holiday. So one of the first holidays we had from Edinburgh was to the Blair Athol Caravan Park.
Funny.
And then
Paths cross.
So that was about probably about 1970, I would think. And then 20 odd years later, I ended up representing Blair Athol as at the heart of my constituency.
Do you believe in coincidence? Do you think it was fate?
Maybe it was,
You've been there a long time, like, so it's not as if you just did like a couple of years. It's been like the sort of epicentre of your political career. Yeah,
well, I've represented Blair Athol and communities of Perthshire for 28 years.
So I'm particularly struck by, I've heard you say that your house was, in a sense, sort of fairly apolitical, but you don't know how your dad has ever voted or how he voted in the independence referendum.
I don't.
That is the funniest thing ever. And does he like just refuse to tell you? Do you not ask?
Oh, of course I ask. Of course I ask. I've asked him 1,000 times, and it's just no way. It's not. He just will not tell me. So it's funny. Like you say, I wasn't in a party political.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Sorry.
But the thing that I was very struck by was my mum was a passionate believer in education. So, in the sense, that was the strongest political sense I had in my house, that my mum believed in education. She believed in the power of education. And I think a lot of that was probably to do with the fact that, bluntly, her education was cut short by the fact before she left, she was the Ducks of Boroughmuir Secondary School in Edinburgh. So she was clearly an intelligent woman, but she had to go out to work. Money needed to be earned for the house. So she didn't fulfill her educational potential. And actually, I got a row for this from my daughter a few months ago when I was talking about my mum. And I was saying to Judith that I really felt angry that my mum hadn't had all the education, because she had all the potential to be a teacher or a lawyer or an accountant. And my daughter said to me, "What makes you think that she wasn't?" Because I learned a lot from talking to Granny. And of course, I felt suitably reprimanded by my daughter, because actually my mother, for all that her formal education stopped when she was 14, she was a wise, educated woman, and she read a lot. She read ferociously in our house, and it brought her incredible joy to read and to express herself. So her education, I suppose the point I'm making is that her formal education didn't go on as long as my formal education went on, but she was educating herself all the time.
Well, the word education itself comes from the Latin educo, which is from within, to bring. So
So
Interesting.
there's a there was never so the education sentiment was very powerful in the house, but when it came to politics, you know, I didn't. I've asked my dad tons of times.
That's so funny.
How do you vote? And you know, and he says, well, that's between me and the ballot box.
Imagine he was voting like Reform.
I
doubt it, but
doubt it.
I just feel that would be even funnier though, because just to really push the envelope in that joke. Um, was your dad like politically engaged? Because correct me if I'm wrong. Around about 2013, he's involved in Carstorphine sort of community council.
He wasn't politically involved, no, but my dad was a man who basically served others. That's what my dad was. So he trained as a mechanic, a car mechanic, and he worked in the motor trade all his days until he retired in his 60s. And interestingly, the skills that he acquired doing his apprenticeship in the late 1940s lasted him for his entire working life.
Does it?
But of course, now, if he was to look at a car, it's more like a computer than it is using the skills that he acquired. So it's an interesting, you know, it's quite an interesting reflection on life that over my dad's working life, his skills allowed him to continue to work and to do what he needed to do. But the world changes around about you, and his skills would not be as relevant now as they were for his whole working life.
It was like his dad and his uncles and stuff, they were all worked in the trams, didn't they, in Edinburgh? How come why did he, do you know why? Like, because just see when I was looking at it, I thought that's strange. They all worked.
Well, they were all either tram drivers or tram conductors.
Yeah.
And I don't know why he I could ask him. And
so I phone him now.
I could phone him now actually, but I'd get some answer, believe you me, if I phoned him now. But so he basically he basically in his working life he looked after people's cars. He served others, and then in his later life when he had retired from working, he joined. I don't know quite why he did it, but he joined the community council in Carstorphine where he lives now, has always lived, and for about, I think, probably about 25 years, he was the secretary of the local community council, and that was all about serving others, helping the community, doing his bit locally, and that was very much what he was like. He did a lot of work in the Boys Brigade as well, again serving others, giving opportunities for others. He was
sounds like a top man.
Yeah.
So around about, is it 75 that the Commonwealth Games, or is it 76? Because I just find this, everybody has like a sort of seminal moment, a defining almost line in the sand where they think, I'm going to do something, I'm going to get involved. And for you, joining the SNP was...
Well, it's slightly like, I think in one newspaper interview, I made a comment about how something that kind of irritated me, and it was about the Commonwealth Games were in 1976, and it was a comment about David Wilkie, who was a Scottish swimmer. And every time he was a success, he was a British success. And every time he didn't win, he was a Scottish failure.
Yeah.
And that really annoyed me. Now I said that in one interview. And of course it goes into the annals of all time as the thing that made me join the SNP. That's not what made me join the SNP. What made me join the SNP was that during the 1970s, I was really interested in current affairs. You know, I kind of, the Scotsman newspaper used to come into our house. I used to read it. I used to know my dad because I used to read it first, and I was interested in what was going on in the world. And there was a big debate going on about whether Scotland should have a parliament, and there was a referendum in 1979 when I was 15.
Can we point out, so that was lost, and was it a technicality? Did they have to meet a certain
threshold? There was more votes in favour than against. There was more yes votes than no votes, but the yes vote had to be 40%, and it was only about 33. So it never happened. So there's a big sense of disappointment in Scotland. And I felt disappointed. I remember coming home from school the lunchtime after the referendum, and my mum saying to me, I don't think your side's going to win today.
I remember that feeling.
And I remember going back to school feeling really gutted by this. And then as the weeks went on, there was an election a few weeks later, and Margaret Thatcher got elected as the Prime Minister. Tories won. The SNP got absolutely wiped out. Went from 11 seats to 2.
Was that when she first came into power?
Mm-hmm. And that was the big change election. And I thought, well, wait a minute. If you care about this issue of Scotland having its own parliament,
Yeah.
you should do something about it.
Oh, so that was 79, after the Winter of Discontent. Do you remember Erin Eve's assassination?
I do. I remember that, yes.
Just for it to sort of fill anybody in, Erin Eve, I think, was Margaret Thatcher's shadow minister for like something in Northern Ireland. And
he was also one of probably her closest associate.
And the Irish Republican movement managed to plant a bomb which blew up. Was it the underground car park in the House of Commons? What was that like at the time? Because again, for me, so when I learned about that, and I thought, whoa, that is intense. That is a serious event. But you kind of look at it and go, well, it's historical hindsight. But to actually get the news coming through about that,
in that moment, it was, because you thought, well, what will this lead to? What will happen? And obviously, you've got the whole impact on the political system, and nobody should lose their life in their politics, and but you did. But it was a pretty traumatic moment.
You end up you were assistant national secretary and then national secretary of the party by age 22. How are you ascending up the party that quickly? Were you just in there were you so committed? Because you've always described yourself as a party man.
I was very active, and I was asked to take a role on within the party as the assistant party secretary.
Was it a lot smaller then?
It was smaller, yeah. It was a smaller organisation, and I was probably viewed to be a really energetic youngster, and I took on this job, and then the guy that was the national secretary stood down, and it sort of, I don't know, it sort of came to me that I had to stand for election, and I did that, and I was 22. So it wasn't, I became that I took on the job temporarily just a few weeks before my final exams at university, and I can remember my mother saying to me, do you really think this is the wisest thing to be doing as you're about to sit your final exams? But as usual, I just ploughed on, and I managed to get through my final exams without too much detriment. But it gave me an opportunity to get really in at the heart of the SNP and to make a contribution, which again was, I suppose it's a bit like I suppose it's part of what I learned from my dad and watching about how he went about life. You make your contribution, you play your part.
Well, so you graduate with the honours degree in politics in 1986. When you're doing the job that you're doing, did you never just think, I'll sack this off because I'm at the coalface, like it's like do you know what I mean? Like learning on the job. Was it important for you that you finished the degree?
Yeah.
That's the laziness. That's me coming.
Go back to what I said to you about my mother and education.
Yeah, right.
I could never have looked my mother in the face if I hadn't.
She'd have knocked you out if you
stayed the course and got and graduated. And it brought, both my brother and I graduated from university, and I think, well, I hope, I don't know, I say I think, I don't know because she never said it to me, but because these things never get said, but I hope my mum felt as if by the fact that her two sons went through university and graduated, that maybe there was a sense that she'd enabled that to happen, which she had.
Oh yeah, I would say that.
So I hope that's how she felt. I'm pretty sure it would be.
I would say absolutely no question of that. So you graduate in 1986. Before I ask you about the 1992 election, general election, I kind of want to get a sense of like, what were the SNP like back then? How were they perceived? Because I remember in 2007 coming into power and thinking, oh wow, like all I've ever known is Labour. And I thought, the SNP, what would this be like? And it seemed really alien and new. And now, as the establishment has been in government for so long.
When I became First Minister, in my acceptance speech in Parliament, I made reference to the fact that when I went to school, Forster High School in Edinburgh, at the age of 15, wearing my SNP badge, my teachers and my friends thought, and this is what I said in Parliament, why has he got involved with this fringe party? Because that's what it was viewed as.
Were they seen as like extremist?
No, fringe.
Fringe.
Kind of a bit, kind of.
Did you know, like
a bit irrelevant, like not kind of, not the kind of, not where the main action was. You're absolutely right, Sean. The action was in Scotland. It was sort of Labour.
Yeah.
And that's what most people knew. So then, so when I got involved in 1979, the SNP was very much a fringe party, and it was lovely that when I made that comment, two of my school friends were in the gallery to see this happening. Two of my closest school friends were there, and to see it, which means the world to me that they were there. And so then by the time we got to 1986, the SNP was probably still viewed pretty fringe-like.
Because I feel like around about 2014, I was living in Barcelona and I was working with people from London, and they sort of perceived it. I don't know if it was through media misrepresentation. They were like, "Oh, why do you hate the English?" Why? And it's like, it's nothing to do with that.
Nothing to do with that.
I said it's not some misdirected notion of xenophobia. I was like, it's just a matter of running your country, I think. And I was like, whether you agree or disagree, I was like, it's not like a sort of hatred for all things south of the border, which is kind of why I wanted to emphasise your grandparents kind of, although they were born in Scotland, they were living down in England. It's
nothing to do with that. It's about where decisions are taken and whether you can take decisions that are right for your community. And that's what it's all about.
1992 comes. How do you end up? So I've got it here. I can't remember every single thing, but it was North Tayside, which is now abolished. 2005 general election. Saw the end of that sort of constituency. 92 comes. Were you up? Was it held by the Conservatives at that point?
Yeah.
Did you think I can win this, or do you think I'm just going to go and have a wee stab at it and see how it goes?
I thought I could win it, and even worse, the exit poll on polling night said that I would win it.
Right, trustees.
So we go through the whole campaign, and it was a good prospect for us. We were in second place. We were about 4,000 votes behind the Tories from the previous election, and I'd worked really hard for 3 years as a candidate to cover the ground and to build our support. And opinion polls were encouraging. So 10 o'clock comes on polling night, the polls close, there's an exit poll, and the exit poll says that the SNP will win 6 seats, and mine was one of them. So I went into the count thinking, well, this might be it. And we went in, and as the night unfolded, it began to become clear to me that the early encouraging signs were not carrying forward. So as we got through the count, I began to realise this is not going to be my night.
Why is that?
Why is it?
Why do the polls? Who's lying?
On an exit poll, exit polls are difficult to do because you're talking to people during polling day about how they voted in a certain number of parts of the country, and then you're trying to create a big picture out of that information, and it's difficult to do. So we ended up getting 3 seats, and we didn't win that night, and it was, believe you me, that was painful.
Yeah. In that moment where you're kind of there celebrating the jubilation, you're feeling despondent, is there a moment you look yourself in the mirror and think, I do not fancy this? Or were you just so committed that you thought the result is kind of secondary because I'm so committed to the cause?
It was, the days after that were really hard. There's a bit of, I suppose there's a bit of grief involved, because you're hopeful, and it doesn't happen, and you've lost, and it was, so I'll never forget how painful that felt. So now, I think,
Well, see, like every loss that I've ever had and every defeat, of which, believe you me, there's a list this long. when I get, the further on I get in life, I'm like, I am so happy that happened, because you only learn in defeat, and you only grow as a result of that pressure.
See, I agree, Sean, because I dusted myself down and I thought, right, this matters to me. The cause of Scottish independence matters to me, that I can make my contribution by trying to win a parliamentary seat and trying to build the support for the SNP. So I'll give this all that I've got. And so I dusted myself down and I got on with it. And I won 5 years later in the 1997 election in the same constituency. But I agree with you that losing made winning all the more precious. And it meant that I understand the power and the value and the preciousness of winning. So therefore, never take that for granted.
Absolutely. I think there is just it's a character formation and resilience that only comes in defeat. And I think when you see some
it's difficult to bear that when it happens to you. But you're totally right. I absolutely agree with you. But it's hell of a painful thing.
It is. I try and say that to people in life, and I'm like, if there's anybody going through something and I'm the one who's been like sort of called upon to counsel them, and I'm like, I know it doesn't seem like it, but you will be so thankful for this one day. And it's like with every failure, every setback, and what you're saying about thinking it's not so much about the victory, the win and the end result, it brings me back to a book that I mentioned this podcast probably every single time I speak to somebody, is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And it's, if you do something for the glory and the riches and the adulation, you're not doing it for the right thing, and you'll never continue. And it's like, if you do it for the right reasons, then all of these riches, so to speak, in whatever form they may take, will come at the end.
See, I can relate to that, because I didn't expect to be First Minister of Scotland.
I didn't expect you to be First Minister either.
Exactly. So, and even if you'd said to me, if we were having this conversation, well, let's say we were having this conversation 2 years ago, I had very actively and positively decided not to stand to be First Minister, because I thought I'd made my contribution. I thought it was time for me to move on. But I found myself a year later having to contemplate this because of all the events that happened within the SNP. But I was essentially, I wasn't doing this because I absolutely had to. It wasn't part of a life plan. If I'd wanted to be First Minister, I could have done it in 2023, but I actively chose not to do it. I thought, that's not the right thing for me at this stage. But a year later it was.
Yeah.
And so there's a time to make that judgment.
Comes back to your dad, that feeling of that serving others, then that's the kind of sense that I'm getting.
Well, I think that's what, I think I think my dad had, my mum and dad have had a huge effect on who I am. My mum, that whole emphasis on education, the importance of education. My mum was a completely non-judgmental person. I never heard her speak once ill of anybody. She was non-judgmental, and I learned that from my mum. And then my dad was a man of service. He worked hard in his working life. He worked hard in his personal time. Like, his working life dominated his life when he was working. Like, he worked long hours. So, if I'm trying to work out where my work ethic comes from, my dad's responsible for that 100%. But then when he retired, he then went on to serve others within the community, which is and that's been, and I hope whatever people think of me, I know folk all think all different views about my politics and all the rest of it. I hope people see me as somebody who actually serves others.
Very interesting point, because I heard you speaking, must have been about a year ago, and you said that one of your biggest aims, and maybe something that you took your eye off the ball was with engaging with those that are completely opposed to you within the government. how much, and this will kind of come on to other things that we're going to talk about in completely different areas, about that engaging with people that you completely disagree with. How do you do that? Like, is there a hostility towards you? Is it all pantomime? Can you go and sit down with the leader of the Conservatives or Labour and have a chat and engage? Because one of the things that, to be completely blunt, that pisses me off beyond belief, just as a voter, as somebody that's watching, is when I see people, mainly in the House of Commons. In fact, I was there the night that Parliament was prorogued in September 2019, and I was fuming at the refusal from some members of the House to listen to or engage with others. And I was like, I've watched a Tory MP barking like a dog while Joe Swinson was trying to speak, who was then Lib Dem leader. And I was like, you're obstructing democracy, and in your childish, primate-like behaviour, you're stopping me from knowing what's going on. And in fact, you have a responsibility to me, to yourselves, to the country, to work in a way that's collaborative, because I'm sure you'd agree that politics is compromise, isn't it, if you really want to achieve something. Sorry, that's a long-winded way of me saying I was really annoyed by that night in 2019.
Well, and I can understand exactly why.
Oh, I could have swung him about by his
So I
tie.
suppose to answer your question, Sean, like like you're right. I've said this publicly. I realised, in the latter stages of my time as a government minister, before I stood down in March 2023 from the government, having served for 16 years as a senior minister. I realised I had stopped talking as much as I used to people in other parties. At all sorts of levels, at the level of issues, but also just at the level of personal kindness.
Yeah.
And so I stood down. I had a year out of frontline politics. I was obviously still in Parliament. I was milling about. I had more time on my hands.
Yeah.
So I was talking to more people in other parties. And in that year, I rebuilt relationships and friendships with people in other parties. And when I unexpectedly became First Minister, I said to myself, well, you've got to make sure you maintain that. So what I'm trying to do, and people that you'll be a judge about whether I manage this, is to treat people with, although I might disagree with people, to treat everybody with courtesy and to listen more to others. And if I can help other people in other parties, so if you see me responding to First Minister's questions, there are some questions that come at me from members of the opposition where I hope they feel they've had a First Minister who's not of their political persuasion, but who's actually done something to help them.
Yeah.
And I think that's at the core of politics. That's what, if you're serving others, that's what you should be doing.
I think attitudes, they really do filter from the top down, and obviously after the murder, the assassinations, let's call them what they are, of David Damas MP, who was my MP when I lived in Essex, and Joe Cox. And I think first and foremost, again, this is not to say that the Scottish Parliament is completely flawless, and that by comparison Westminster is a chaotic zoo. But I think most of that sort of attitude does emanate from there, in terms of MPs sort of whipping up a bit of hostility towards each other. And I think in the way in which we publicly engage, it's like, look, be passionate, be theatrical. I enjoy the theatrics of it and the debate and stuff, it's brilliant. But it's like, let's keep a lid on it. And it starts in the House and people watch it, and then those attitudes filter through.
I think that's right. And in amongst all that, never lose sight of the importance of courtesy and respect for others.
By the way, one of my favourite Bible verses, it's like, who am I to judge anyone when I walk as an imperfect person? I'm no doubt I've been a wee fud on like Twitter and stuff to MPs and politicians in the past, and for that I'm genuinely showing contrition. I'm sorry. I'm talking like maybe 10 years ago, in the height of the independence debate and that type of thing. But I learned from it, and it's like, let's just be better. So instead of me pointing fingers and going, you did this and you said that, it's like, how about we all just be a wee bit sounder to each other?
Yeah. I think that's what I've tried to do as First Minister, because I think I think our politics are they're too polarised just now.
Yeah,
There's too much aggravation,
definitely.
and I'm trying to use my role as First Minister to bring people together.